All right, next up, emergency preparedness update. This will be presented by our fire chief, Mr. Jesse Alexander.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. September is National Preparedness Month, and so we kind of felt that that was fitting to give a presentation on where we stand with emergency preparedness for Yuba City, which we have a 6-step plan in place to work on for emergency management. That would include our emergency notification system, training, evacuation zones, our department operations centers and emergency operations center, testing the system, and developing our emergency operations plans. These don't need to go in sequential order, but we've been working on components of each one of these and wanted to briefly cover with you what accomplishments on each one of those categories that we've done over the last 16 months. So I'll start with our emergency notification system, which is Code Red. And that is our primary way and probably our most effective way of reaching out to the community in regards to an emergency that's out there. So last summer, our dispatchers worked with Code Red to get proper training on how to build immediate notifications, how to build pre-built messages, how to create the maps, all the training associated with that. And then we started a marketing campaign associated with that, where we performed a citywide test last September as part of National Emergency Preparedness Month. Paper, radio, television, social media, website, and pamphlets that have been distributed and utility bills and are also at local businesses, encouraging people to sign up for Code Red. You've probably heard me talk before about in the fire service, we're in the time business because of how fast fire progresses and how quickly we have to get there. This is even more important so on disasters, because you're not only fighting the time associated with the disaster, but you're fighting the component of getting the right information out as quickly as possible. Because if you're not getting that information out fast, there's going to be misinformation or incorrect information that will hinder the operation. So it's important to get those messages out fast through Code Red. Since we started this process back in September 1st, our registered phone count in Yuba City was 9,500 in registered phone numbers. Since this marketing campaign pulled those numbers in August 5th, we're at 18,764. So that's a 216% increase in our registered individuals with Code Red within the city. And those are registered phone numbers. But Code Red's not the only mechanism that we use for our notification. We do have a social media team that's active on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter that helps try to get those messages out. Recently, we've started TED Talk style videos to let people know what we've done and encourage other components of building go kits, emergency preparedness kits, those type of components. One part that I'm personally very happy about is the fire department's website on emergency notification. It's very user-friendly, and there is an enormous amount of information, and encourage everyone to go there. So it's just not a spot where you can sign up and learn about the fire department or Code Red, but the amount of emergency notification stuff from preparing kits, evacuation plans, power outages, and there's a lot of information on there for small business owners too. We always have, in the fire service, you're always wanting a backup plan. And so same thing with emergency notification system. And what we internally use is WhatsApp. And so recently used that on some of the fire, especially up on the call door, where internet and phone service is not necessarily reliable during an emergency. We've seen that from disasters. So we've created groups in the city to be able to communicate back and forth when we have poor cell reception. We have one set up for our Department Operations Center. We have one established for our executive team, our fire management team, and our fire operations. In addition, we've also created a OneDrive. It's basically, think of it as a electronic filing cabinet where we store all of our emergency management documents in there. So that if we have our plan to open up our EOC at Station 4, in the event that something happens and we're not able to get to those binders, those books, we always have everything available to us as long as we have access to internet and a computer to access these documents. The next part is training. So we've established a tracking mechanism in the city to track where everybody is in regards to their mandatory training. We have a citywide basic training plan for everybody that requires them to get all of their NIMS and ICS training done. And all the workers for the Yuba City are registered disaster service workers, and they complete the yearly training on that, which they've done. In addition to that, we've had formal classes, especially with Incident Management 300, which is for an expanding disaster. So all the executive staff and some of the mid-managers participated in that. And then in addition to that, we had some very basic emergency operations center training tied to that. We've also identified roles, responsibilities, and checklists for all the key positions. We've gathered all of those documents and put those in electronic form on that OneDrive, but we've also created the hard binders, the copies that we have in those key locations. And then in addition to that, all the EOC command and general staff have met one-on-one to go over those roles, responsibilities, and checklists, so they've had that hands-on training. We've created a public information officer team, basically, and it's comprised of 4 personnel that have attended a PIO training with Incident Management Team 4, which I kind of feel like that's the premier in regards to public information officers. And so they came back, brought some great stuff, and created this team. Since then, they've established press releases, they've done television news interviews, public service announcements, and at least one has gone out and developed and expanded their skills on mutual aid incidents. And that one individual has actually performed in part of the operations briefing for one of the Dixie Fire incidents, which is a big deal, big deal. So based upon previous disasters and trying to look at best practices, we've also modified our evacuation zones. So we've created 35 micro or mini evacuation zones throughout the city. What this allows us to do is to be more surgical in our evacuation process, and the fact that we can identify and evacuate a single neighborhood, or we can expand that out into a larger area in a systematic, more calculated way to be more efficient and effective. So this is not just a flood evacuation zone. This is I would consider an all-risk evacuation zone map that allows us to evacuate and contemplate for things like hazardous materials incident, active shooters, things along those lines. It's also, I like to reference it as a way to use as a quick search grid for missing children, things along those lines. And thought processes that went in their place was exactly for that. Isolating high-risk areas, looking at wind directions or normal flow patterns, so for those areas so that we could quickly evacuate. We also identified 4 community relocation centers throughout the city that allows us to relocate a small portion of people in a very timely fashion without the need to establish a full shelter. So if you need to move somebody for a natural gas leak for just a quick hour, you can get them to an open site. We've developed the plans for their first responders to be able to implement these evacuations. And then we're currently in the process for each one of those zones building a pre-built message for one of the 3 types of evacuations you could receive, which is an evacuation warning, evacuation order, and a shelter-in-place notice. Because the reality is when a disaster happens, the 911 system is going to blow up. That's just the reality. Everybody's going to be calling. And this way, if we have these pre-built messages and we say, hey, we want a shelter-in-place to a hazardous materials incident for everybody in 2E, our dispatch center has that pre-built, already done. They're not having to record messages or type out anything. It's pre-done and sent out. So that will hopefully help dispatch center in trying to get out that timely information as quickly as possible. We've also worked on our Department Operations Center and our Emergency Operations Center. And so we've done a simulated Department Operation drill for a wind event. We've also been running a DOC during the entire period of the pandemic, at which point for every single one of the operational periods, we've developed situation reports to determine what action items we need to address and make sure that we're hitting all those essential service functions within the city. We've worked on our emergency operations centers where we've redesigned our entire organizational chart for the EOC to be kind of more consistent with best practices out there. And we've identified the responsibilities for each one of those positions at least 2 deep. So that we're not relying on just one individual that might be on vacation in Hawaii to fill the logistics role. We've built some depth in there. We've also gone out and identified individuals that might be outside of the community that hold special skill sets and plug those in so that we can pull from other incident management teams if they're available, or people that just have a lot of experience in an EOC. And we've taken all that information and put it on that electronic OneDrive so that we can access that anywhere. Next is testing the system. So that's what National Preparedness Month is. You go through it, you test the system. We do a yearly code red test. We have another one that will occur September 30th at 1 p.m. for all the residents of Yuba City. We also work when testing the system on non-emergency events, so event planning. So a good example would be the Sikh Parade. Working through those, developing incident action plans, working with our partners on planning those events. We do it on possible weather events and then tabletop exercises. And then you have the actual emergency events themselves where you test the system, i.e. with the pandemic of what we've been doing. And then you have finally your emergency operations plans. So during the pandemic, each department created a continuity of operations plan. We've been working with the county to develop a local hazard mitigation plan, which is finalized. And then we've been working on the policy development so that we know when there's a power outage in the city, what percentage of the city and how long before we open a DOC and how long before we open an EOC. But with that being said, we still have a lot of work to do. And these are still the things that need to be accomplished. So we need to finish doing these pre-built messages on evacuation zones. I'd like to upgrade our AM 1500 radio station that the mayor implemented when he was the fire chief. It allows us to be able to reach out and communicate on a wide scale, a good timely message that we're able to voice, especially when people are in a vehicle leaving and, during an emergency. Having that radio broadcast is key. Performing a DOC full-scale exercise, performing an EOC facilitated exercise, like to host a town hall meeting on emergency preparedness. And then our emergency operation plan, which is that large comprehensive plan that the city has for everything. Some of them can be very basic and some can be very in-depth. And I'm kind of an in-depth type of guy, and they take a little bit of a while to write. They're a 6 to 8 month process. And so either using a consultant or writing it over the winter is the goal, is to start that process. And then currently the county is working on a countywide flood plan with a consultant to develop some protocols for that. That being said, are there any questions?
Council.
Through the mayor?
Yes.
Thanks, Chief. I like the town hall idea, by the way. I like that. So I'm looking at the evacuation zone map, specifically a flood emergency, we'll say a break on this side of the levee, depending on where the break is. Would the call-out system specify each zone which avenue to take to get out of town?
So this was designed as an all risk. So if we have the time and we know the situation where we want people to go and drive time, we can add that into the quick message on the bottom. So it allows dispatch to modify the pre-built message if we have where we want to go. Ideally, we want to get out in front, especially on evacuating an entire city. That's very challenging to evacuate an entire city. Road systems are just usually not developed to be able to handle that type of load. So trying to stagger a system out. So using your example on this one, like it'd be ideal if we could go, hey, 5D, 5F, and 5H, you have a mandatory evacuation. 5E and 5G, you're at a warning, so that you stagger that process out and try to hopefully reduce the load on the roadways and then direct them in there to where you'd want to go. If it's going to be a flood situation, you're going to set up a full evacuation site. So we'd want to let them know which evacuation site, whether it's obviously it wouldn't be our fairgrounds in that scenario, but either heading out or heading up across the bridge to make sure that they're in a full evacuation site.
Anybody else? Chief, thank you. I know this has been something that has been a very high priority for you, despite your call-outs all over the state to support. I like the fact that it's all risk. I think that's incredibly important because our community, with its 99-20 access and airport, and I mean, we can go down the list of the different things that could cause us some grief here in Yuba City. My biggest concern is going to continue to be, as long as I have the privilege and the honor to sit up here, is to find you stable funding for emergency preparedness activities. What happens typically, and we've seen this in this city time and time again, is we have an incident, we get all jazzed up, we fund stuff, and then we get complacent again. And this is no knock on anybody. It's just kind of the life cycle of emergency preparedness. Yeah, and the law of catastrophic reform. And, you know, until a catastrophe happens, people just don't keep this top of mind. So I honor the work that you're doing. I know the police department is engaged as well. I know your county partners, and I'll be talking about them in my comments afterwards and the challenges they're facing. I know they're sitting at the table as well. I just continue to not challenge you, but encourage and support you in trying to make sure that we we keep this as top of mind as possible. You never know when it's going to happen, and exercise, exercise, exercise. Anybody else?
Through the mayor, I just want to acknowledge the amount of work that you and your team have done in the last, what was it, 16, 19 months? I don't want to get it wrong.
About 16 months.
16 months, because I know you're very precise, Chief, so 16 months. And increasing the code red, I know that's, I think I've signed up twice. So I'm somewhere in that system twice, and I lost my password. We don't need to talk about it, but I need help. I'm sure other people probably messed up their code red passwords on the system.
But just for your knowledge, it doesn't count duplicate numbers. So those numbers I gave you are those registered numbers for individuals. So that has been a question that's brought up. So what about if a person's registered 2 or 3, 4 times? Does that, increase the count? And the answer to that is no.
Okay, good to know, but I'm going to need some help with that.
Okay.
But impressive, and echo what the mayor said, and the idea of doing the town hall, excellent idea, and I would love for us to branch out and bring in people that are normally not in those conversations, which you are very supportive of that. So look forward to working with you on the next things that we're going to do together, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Through the mayor.
Yes.
If I can just echo what you said. First of all, Chief, great job. Second part is any of us that has served as a first responder or served in the military, you hit on it up there, and that is real-life exercises, tabletop exercises. It's great to have those books, but if they got 2 inches of dust on them when the disaster hits, we're scrambling, and it needs to be instinct. So I really look forward to those, and I appreciate the initiative that you've taken on this. Thank you.
Through the mayor,
Yes.
may I take the unusual step of actually offering a comment on this item?
Absolutely.
As you know, we represent a lot of cities and helped out a lot of cities during COVID, and we've seen a lot of emergency responses, a lot of mediocre emergency responses, and worse. The one city out of the entire state that we've been helping out on the various cities that stood out as the gold standard was Yuba City. They had the best response, they had the best plans, they had the best staff, and they did the most exemplary job out of all of them. And they helped provide example to the other cities and were there to help consult with them as they were going through this process. And I just wanted to recognize Yuba City's unique position in that regard. So thank you.
Very good to know. Thanks for sharing that.